This video is sponsored by Keeps.
Hey, I'm Keith and welcome back to the shop. White concrete, riffs on white oak, sliding dovetails, dominoes, even a little time on the lathe to turn this center support, and a field trip to have a CNC cut the mold for the concrete top. I packed a lot of stuff in this little teeny tiny footprint. So stick around and I'll show you how I did it.
All right, this project actually started out on a CNC at my buddy Mike's shop. He's the owner of Veteran Wood Co. and he owns this giant Stepcraft CNC. Last time I was over there, he showed me this HDU, high-density urethane material, which is a closed-cell, completely impermeable, waterproof material, and I thought, hey, that might be a good idea to cut for a mold when pouring concrete. Mike usually uses it for signs that are going to be outdoors, but I thought this could be a great application for it as well. So in a matter of an hour and a half, Mike whipped up a program, cut it, and there you have it. So back at the shop, I gave it a good waxing, let it dry, gave it another coat of wax, and while that was drying, I could start cutting my material for my legs. I'm using riffs on white oak for this project, and just to give you an idea on price, I bought one 2x4x8, and it was $54.88 plus tax. Now, since the 3 legs will ultimately be 1 1/4 inches thick, I cut 3 pieces, and then the other piece I resawed in half for the little stretchers, which will be 3/4 of an inch thick. And then I stacked and stickered those little puppies and let them acclimate for a day.
All right, so here's the situation. I got my HDU form waxed, ready to go, auger on my Harbor Freight drill, the white concrete countertop mix from Z Counterform, white pigment, bucket, scale. I'm going to measure this out because I do not need the entire 50-pound bag.
I started by adding water and then the pigment and then the 99.9% dust-free concrete countertop mix. Quite similar to the cat litter that I use. And I gave that a good augering till I got a nice little pancake batter consistency once I got it where I liked it. And then I cleaned off the auger using the old extract and spin maneuver. Yeah, I invented that. And then I could pour. Ooh, like lava. White lava. Creamy mashed potatoes, soft serve, white chocolate fudge avalanche. Okay, you get the picture. I also installed some reinforcement mesh and then did my best. Who's a famous drummer? Bono? No, Bonham. Someone Bonham. Yeah, he's a good drummer. You could also use a sander or a reciprocating saw, anything that vibrates to try to get those air bubbles out.
All right, so here's my sketch I'm working with. You got a center post here that's gonna have 3 stretchers coming off with sliding dovetails. Here's the top view. This outside line represents the outside diameter of the concrete top. This inner circle represents the outside diameter of the legs from outer point to outer point. So now I want to divide this into 3 sections. I ran a perpendicular line right up through my circle. I set my dividers to that radius. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it down here where the circle meets my perpendicular line. I'm going to draw an arc, and now, so now I have 1, 2, 3 equal pie slices.
Delicious. Now I had glued up the stock for the center post a long time ago and I just had this chunk laying around. So on the bandsaw, I roughed it out closer to a circle, which would make it easier for me to turn on the lathe. Well, I meant to rotate on the lathe, not physically turn the power on the lathe. Now I'm using these carbide tools by Woodpeckers, which can make an incredible novice like me feel like I know how to turn, even though I really don't. And then I head to the drill press to start what could be my most creative and useful jig to date. I started by taking my center post and putting it down on my 2-dimensional drawing and drawing reference lines where these stretchers would go. Then I used a center finder to draw out my pie slices, erase what won't be there so I don't get confused. So I needed a way to secure this round center post and run it through the router table to cut my sliding dovetails. And the only way I could think to do that was to create a chase around it that would give me a square flat reference surface on the table as well as on the fence. So with some CA glue, scrap wood, and screws, I created what looks like the shipping crate for the Hubble telescope. And you can see there how the layout line on the center post lines up nicely with the center line on the jig. Now to the router table to check its seaworthiness.
So what I have set up here, this is basically a pattern bit or template bit, but you can also plunge with it. So I'm going to use it to flatten the 3 areas where the dovetail is going to go. I want that surface to be flat so that the flat end of the stretcher will sit perpendicular to that. The center of my bit lined up with my layout line. I'll take a light pass and square that off. Now you may be asking, why don't you just do that with a hand plane? Well, because I don't wanna.
And as you can see, I'm employing the use of a stop block to ensure that all 3 passes are a consistent length. Now the key to this jig is that screw right there. It is the rotation Gestapo to make sure that that post does not turn in the jig. So with a quick spin, line up with my layout line and secure it, I'm ready to run a pass on another side.
So the tricky part is getting this the right height the first time, because you can't start low and inch your way up, because the wide part of the bit would be here, and then you'd be a narrower part, so it would make a step there. So you only get one shot at this. So I don't really know the optimal depth here, so I'm gonna go with a 1/2 inch and go for broke.
I'm using a Pony Jorgensen wooden hand screw clamp to give me a nice grip on that jig so I can go nice, slow, and controlled over the bit. Do not push this too hard, just take a nice, slow, controlled cut. Once all 3 keyways are cut, I can fully release it from the jig, release it into the wild, and there you go. Then, with a little chisel work, I could clean up that shoulder left by the bit on the flattening pass. Now, the legs on this little table splay out at 5 degrees, so I cut a 5-degree miter on the top, and then go to my sketch and mark out the length, and then back to the miter saw to cut each leg to length with that 5-degree miter on the bottom now. Then I run them through the table saw to the final width, which is 2 inches. I can also run my stretchers through at this point. Those are a final width of 1.75 inches. I cut a 5-degree bevel on the ends of the stretchers, but I do not cut these to length just yet. And to get my layout lines for the dominoes, I just push everything flush up against the fence and use a setup block to draw a line. And I'm using 8 by 50 millimeter dominoes to secure the stretchers to the legs. At this point, I put a 1/4 inch round over on the outside of each leg because it's going to be difficult to do this after these legs are beveled. Speaking of bevel, we'll head to the table saw and put a 5-degree bevel on each side of the legs. So now that we've cut our first bevel, we encounter an issue, because when you put this up against the fence and the bottom is flat against the table saw, it's easy for this to kick in when you're pushing through. So we're going to need to cut an angled shim that we can glue on here, and we'll ride along the fence to make sure that this stays flat on the fence and on the table saw. I just grab a piece of scrap wood to accomplish this task, and then some CA glue to secure it. That way it's easily pop-offable afterwards. And a 1, and a 2, and a 3. I mean, seriously, how much epoxy can one person use in a table? Unbelievable. Hair loss. I'm a victim. I started losing my hair when I was in my late 20s. Somehow it's managed to hang on, but I still feel every day when I get up that I'm one swift breeze from everything just blowing right off my head like a dandelion spore. I mean, I'm genetically predisposed to lose my hair. It says right here in my genetics report. I mean, 2 out of 3 guys will experience some sort of male pattern baldness by the age of 35. And the best way to prevent hair loss is to do something while you still got a beautiful head of hair. So let's talk about the sponsor of this video, Keeps.com. Now, if you've ever looked into the pricing of hair loss supplements, it is very expensive. But with Keeps.com, you don't have to go broke. Not only that, no doctor's visits, no going to the pharmacy to pick up a prescription. It's delivered right to your door every 3 months. Now, Keeps treatments can take up to 4 to 6 months or more to see results, so the best advice is to act fast. Now, Keeps products are only good for hair loss on your head, nowhere else. So if you're a bald-chested Scandinavian, British, Irish, Northern European, Southern European chap like me, consider yourself lucky, because I only want to put on a sweater when I have to. I don't want to have to wear one all the time. So if you're ready to take action and prevent hair loss, go to keeps.com/Keith Johnson. That's KEEPS.com/Keith Johnson. Or click the link in the description below to save 50% off your first order. All right, so we're gonna have to use the same shim when we taper this. And now that I think about it, Lola reminded me that I probably should have tapered these first. Not a problem, we didn't screw anything up, just a little more work. And the tapering jig comes out of the bullpen, and despite not getting much playing time, it performs masterfully and tapers all 3 legs to the exact same taperage. Now, to get the length of my stretcher, I use a laser to shoot a line up and mark it, and you could also use a level or a plumb bob or your eye. Now, unfortunately, I forgot to turn the camera on when I ran my initial test cuts for the dovetail, but the height of the bit shouldn't change from when you put it in your center post, just the distance from the fence changes. So after I run my test passes, I do a quick test fit, and that should work nicely. We'll have to clean up that bottom so it seats down in there. So now I can cut my stretchers to length, which includes the length of that dovetail. Don't forget that. And then I could run all of my pieces through. Now this little jig I created is just a 90-degree jig with a Bessie toggle clamp. Nothing fancy, but it keeps your hands far away from that blade because that is a small piece to handle on a router table. And with a sharp chisel, I round off that dovetail tenon so it seats nicely in the bottom of that dovetail keyway. And now it was time to extract the concrete top from the high-density urethane mold.
Nice.
So as you can see, I have quite a few air bubbles around the outer rim, but none on the inner flat surface, which I'm okay with. I guess I just need to vibrate it more next time. Then I could begin final surface prep on all my parts. Well, all my parts is really 7. 3 legs, 3 stretchers, and 1 center post. But be that as it may, I use a hand plane to get off all the mill marks, and then a sanding block up to 150. Then it was back to the lathe to cut that center post to final length. You can see to the left of my cut line I have a pencil mark because I couldn't quite decide what I wanted to do, and I ended up going back to that Look
out!
Whoopsie. Whew, that was close. Little sanding and that nub is gone. Can round over that and give a final sand de fleur to the post itself. All right, folks, just so you know, I get just as stressed out over glue up as anyone else, so I try to do them in stages when I can. So when I have a domino, I will generally glue in one side first. That way it's in, and then I work on the other side. Now, I had to cut 5-degree clamping blocks so that I got nice square pressure across that joint. Then I let those dry, well, like it says, for a few hours. Then came back out. Lola gave me a hand with stage 2. And then, sadly, I dismantled my beloved jig so I could make clamping blocks for the final glue up. I used some double stick tape to adhere those to the center post so Lola wouldn't take off with them. And then I could applique some more glue, slide that in, and give it a squeeze. The problem was these joints were in such close proximity to each other that stacking clamps on top of one another was a little bit tricky, but once that glue had set, I could remove the clamps and then mark my holes for the threaded inserts in the concrete. I'm just using a brad point bit to mark the center of my hole location, and then a masonry bit to drill the holes for the threaded inserts. I use a little epoxy to secure the inserts and make sure they won't fall out of the concrete, while Jerry and his tomfoolery in the background. And then it was on to the finish. I'm using Rubio Monocoat Smoke 5% on this one, which is pretty much my favorite on white oak. The last project I used Natural, which was the client's choice, which was nice, but I'm just a big fan of the Smoke 5%. So I use a white Scotch-Brite to rub it in everywhere and then wipe off all the excess with a microfiber cloth and then stick it on a bed of nails to dry. Feel it one last time and then head to grab the sealer for the concrete. But before I seal it, I wet sand with 600 grit sandpaper to give me a nice smooth surface, and then wipe it dry. It's Aquathane M35 waterborne coating by Concrete Countertop Solutions. So much better than the M34. Give that a nice thin coat, and then I'll let that sit for 4 to 8 hours and apply a second coat before final assembly. And right on cue, final assembly. I'm using 1.5" 1/4-20 bolts to secure into those threaded inserts. And thank you, Lola, and whoosh, slide you over here. And we're done. And I'll finish off with some glamour shots. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment below, let me know what you think of this project, and we will see you on the next one.